our inability to see the future and how potentially easy it is to undercook the future value of something. Mm-hmm. And the framing I'll give there being, I saw a post recently of one of Uber's pitch decks where they put their total addressable market at $4.5 billion. That company today is worth over 100 billion. So the total addressable market for money is huge, but like maybe Bitcoin's total addressable market is much bigger than even that. So I'll let you take it whichever way you think is most interesting.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to have an addressable market. It's an entirely different question as to whether the thing that you're considering is ever going to actually address that market. So yeah, while it's possible, that is it provides, I guess, a upper limit. That addressable, when the idea of an addressable market provides an upper limit. In fact, I've heard it a lot of. If we go back to the sort of Shark Tank idea that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, one of the biggest irritants I've heard that a lot of the people who get things pitched to them often say is when the person pitching an idea comes to them with the cliche, if we just take 1% of this market, our company will be worth this much. But of course, it's a lot harder than you think for something to actually even end up addressing 1% of that market. That's the key thing. It really is a huge if. We so far with Bitcoin have been, although it was the addressable market for Bitcoin was always the same from day one. So far, despite today's not so good price action, we've been very, very lucky in terms of the percentage of the addressable market that Bitcoin has already addressed. But just because there is that addressable market doesn't necessarily mean that it will end up addressing it for a whole bunch of reasons. Whether one of those big reasons is whether or not enough other people come to the same realization about it. People have been saying, I want to sound this as a bit of a warning. There's a great reasons always to be positive in this with Bitcoin, and I've always been that person. But at the same time, I think we're not a cult. I don't want this to be a cult where we only consider the upside and we only look at why it's going to work. We should also have a degree of intellectual honesty and look at potential downsides too, so we can steel ourselves for those eventualities too. But one of those things is the idea that we risk with Bitcoin lapsing into what I call gold bug eschatology. Now, if you've ever followed gold, like again, and this is where, but prior to Bitcoin, as I said, I was looking at how money worked. The alternative, people who thought that way, who had that skepticism about the legacy financial system, their answer to that was always gold. And the way in which many of them tried to sell gold as an idea to people was that there was always going to be some sort of like imminent financial collapse that was going to make gold go to the moon and finally address that market for money that you just mentioned. Now, you can go back and actually find articles, and there's always like one every week, since the early 1970s, where you've got these guys saying, these gold bugs saying, because of some piece of information that was just released this week, some new figure that just came out, or some line that crossed some other line on some graph somewhere, because of that, the financial system is about to collapse, and gold is going to eat everyone's lunch. Gold is going to go to the moon in the opposite to that. And then and you can find those articles going back to the early 1970s, ever since Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard. Now, we know sort of on a mathematical perspective that the fiat system is ultimately not sustainable indefinitely. But that's the whole problem. It is indefinite. They have been able to kick the can down the road, kick the inevitable down the road, on and on and on and on. And there's a lot of gold bugs that have died with all their gold and never realized any benefit because they were always waiting for that always imminent financial collapse that would pump their gold bags that never came. And so I worry sometimes that when I hear that same rhetoric among other Bitcoiners, that it's all a fait accompli. Well, yeah, it'll happen, but if it happens when would you want to be like the richest Bitcoiner in the cemetery? Because that might be what ends up happening. We just don't know how long the can keep getting kicked down the road. And what happens if it gets kicked down the road beyond like the practical ability for any of us to realize the benefit of this. Because ultimately, money is a means to an end. It is a means to an end. Like, what do you want to buy? It's something that you have to exchange for goods and services. And there have been, for the last, many, in fact, always the entirety of Bitcoin's existence, very good reasons just to simply save the money and not spend it, because the opportunity cost of spending has been too high because of the fact that you miss out on the very rapid growth. But we don't know, but that growth has been slowing, and we don't know how long that growth will keep slowing for before such time as it somehow then does that S-curve that the gold bugs have been dreaming about since the early 1970s, and that S-curve being brought about by the financial collapse that has so far been able to be kicked down the road. So that's the not trying to be negative, but that's like the alternative that we have to kind of keep in the back of our mind.
Well, I for one didn't see a US government coming in with a Department of Efficiency and slashing government over expenditure and talking about let's audit the Fed and actual fiscal responsibility. Like that wasn't really in my playbook for 2025, like straight off the bat. And it's really like the US that I think drives, inevitably as the reserve currency of the world, a lot of the base case for a Bitcoin breakout is basically betting on governments continuing to spend more than they earn. And
now
it'll be very interesting to see after year one, like what work can they do on their deficit. I think if it does anything, it'll probably just slow down the growth of Bitcoin in a developed nation like the United States. But the real kind of product market fit in my mind, like, when I was building Bitcoin with Jake, I would speak with people from Venezuela or Guatemala or Vietnam or Kenya, and they're working in places where now they're internet connected, but they have really poor financial services. Bitcoin to them is a no-brainer. It's like, yep, okay, cool. This is a better system. But the government can't take it from me. Yeah, cool, I'm in. It's not even a hard sell. And so that, I think, will still crunch away in the background. But maybe it will take longer. Like, oh my God, fiscal responsibility. Didn't guess that was going to come. What does that mean? Well, it just elongates this adoption process.
Yeah, well, most of the naysayers when it comes to Bitcoin naysay from their position of comfort in relatively well-functioning Western economies. I say relatively well-functioning.
It's the classic champagne socialist.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Whereas in you go to other countries, and there's of course, the countries like what you mentioned, and they immediately see the need for it. And quite often we find ourselves having to remind those naysayers that, yeah, but not everyone is in the comfortable position you're in. There are plenty of people that don't have the benefits of the system that you still believe in. Now, whether those people can drive the economic energy that they're able to put into Bitcoin to make the number go up, that's a different question. Can those people have as much effect on Bitcoin that way than what the Western economies, should they decide to get solidly behind Bitcoin, would do? Perhaps not, but that's not their problem. Like, that's a luxury that we have. We can sit here on our Bitcoin bags and go, and we can look at it in terms of like the benefit in terms of what the price is doing. These guys are not buying it just so that they can get more spending power out of it later on. They're just grateful that they can hold the spending power they've already got, or that they've got a way of sending money to people that can't be stopped by third parties, censored transactions, this sort of thing. Or they've just got the ability now to be self-banked. I mean, I don't know what the statistics were, but there was a big chunk of the world that was essentially unbanked. And we can't let ourselves forget what one of the big missions of Bitcoin was, and that was to essentially bank the unbanked. Or rather, when I say bank the unbanked, they would be now self-banked. It would give those people financial empowerment. So we've got the luxury of being able to look at Bitcoin through the lens of what it can do to our own personal wealth position. But those guys have got tremendous benefits from Bitcoin just in being able to do things that we already took for granted.
And actually, JP, that brings to mind for me, though, this is about individual empowerment, individual betterment. And whether you want to frame it as like a self-interest thing and therefore kind of selfish in a sense, it doesn't really matter. But also, I'm not buying Bitcoin for like world domination. It's just a case of like, what's the best decisions available to me today to help myself and my family?
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, it's buying Bitcoin.